One of the more original creative decks that could be created in the game, the Trap Monster deck, finds itself in a rather interesting situation in the modern meta, for it can do some things. But it does appear that a vast majority of duelists have forgotten how effective this deck can be. Let's figure out exactly what a Trap Monster deck can do. It is important to note that, not surprisingly, based on the title of this deck build, it is an old-school Trap Monster deck, thus no Paleozoic monsters allowed. The first analysis is to obviously investigate which trap monsters do not make the cut and which make the big time. Statue of Anguish pattern is definitely the most important combo piece for this deck because it makes the deck playable against the current fast meta. On its own, pattern is a 2500 defense monster. Not bad, but certainly not the wall it once was. However, it really shines in combination with other trap monsters, for not only is it protected from targeting with a trap friend on the field, but it can also destroy any card on the field when a trap monster is summoned to the field. Of course, some more persnickety players may complain that pattern targets and destroys. That's not good anymore. But with a large number of cards still vulnerable in some manner to targeted card destruction, especially when pattern can interrupt your opponent's plays, preventing the opponent from getting to those more dangerous monsters in the first place, pattern is still high quality. Also, it can devastate back row, allowing for more playmaking on your turn. As a level 7, it can make some nice XZ plays in combination with a partner pattern to make a quasi-kill card like Red Eye's Flare Metal Dragon, or a rather annoying card like Big Eye. 3 copies. The next most important trap monster in my opinion is Abyss Stungray. For when it hits the monster zone, it is a 1900 attack, light, level 5 that cannot be destroyed by battle, which allows it to produce some meaningful level of field presence when you need time to set up. Stungray is also one of the heavier hitters of the deck, for while it only has 1900 attack, it will have a number of opportunities to swing away. Finally, Stungray is also nice for making some strong extra deck plays, either a Pleiades or a number 61 when the situation warrants it, or it can be used as the starting bridge to some high-level synchros like Abyss. 3 copies. While its general popularity has seemingly waned over the years, the current meta is run by decks that can spit out high attack point monsters rather consistently, be it Blue Eyes, Cosmos, Metaphos. Thus, I run 3 copies of Metal Reflect Slime for additional defense when more traditional routes are not available. Also, as a level 10, a pair of slimes can team up to make a rather nasty rail cannon, befitting the situation, either Dora or Gustav. In my opinion, a trap monster deck needs to be more offensive than defensive when the options are available for either. So, to further advance the balance between attacking and defending, we have more defense right now than attack. I run 3 copies of Zoma the Spirit. Zoma is a solid card at 1800 attack, with a rather useful effect of dealing effect damage to the opponent when destroyed by battle, which can make a nice wall for opponents that may not have the necessary resources to make a strong push, especially during the late game, or you can just simply suicide it into a big monster and end the game yourself. The initial summons in defense position is really not a big deal when playing smart. While it may seem a little light, that closes the book on the trap monsters that make the cut. The reason for such a small trap monster count is simple. The meta has become too powerful to focus on a large number of trap monsters. Thus, the quality ones must be run and supported by other cards. It's basically a quality over quantity argument. Now, let's talk about those that don't, and why. Both Swamp Mirror and Quantum Cat work well together, but tend not to work well apart in a trap monster-oriented deck. Their union is effective, for they both have the ability to pick an attribute and type when they're summoned to the field as monsters, opening the door to numerous rank 4 versatility. Also, for those interested in running Mass Change 2, their attribute selection opens the door up to any Mass Hero summons at the given moment. Overall, I believe that Mirror's 1800 attack trumps Quantum Cat's 2200 defense, for while Cat's 2200 defense is nothing to sneeze at, it has become more and more inferior when going up against meta decks, so Cat struggles a little to be a meaningful defender, and can't do anything for attacking purposes. For those who want a more XZ-heavy strategy in their trap monster deck, these two are definitely worth a look. However, I choose to go another way. Tiki Curse and Tiki Soul are also a more direct pair of trap monster partners that a number of players in the past, and maybe even now, still like running in this type of deck. This choice is not surprising because on its face, their effects appear to be rather useful. Curse destroys opponents' monsters with its effect after those monsters engage in battle with another trap monster, which works very nicely with the particular continuous trap staple in this deck. Soul offers additional protection by allowing other trap monsters to return to their original back row set position when destroyed, letting you summon them again during the next turn. While the Tiki Twins are solid cards, after reading their effects, one quickly realizes that they have one glaring weakness. Their effects are not applied to themselves, and one smaller weakness. The resultant life point damage from attacking into opponent monsters relative to Curse's effect, because you still take battle damage. In a lot of respects, I view these two monsters in a similar light to a card like Performapal Lizard Draw, when it is a monster on the field. Drawing is great, except no reasonably intelligent opponent is going to attack a monster that is not Lizard Draw first. Same goes here. If it can be helped, no opponent is going to eliminate a trap monster before eliminating the corresponding Tiki Twin. Without these cards having a form of you cannot attack me if another trap monster with a different name exists on the field type effect, they're not that helpful, especially in the fast-paced meta that exists now. And with the lower attack points of most of the trap monsters topping out at 1900, using Curse's effect over and over again can result in some meaningful life point damage with little general progress. Basically, in my opinion, the Tiki Twins look great when they work, but are rather mediocre overall. In the end, though, if you want to run the Tiki Twins, I think it's one of those cards that you either need to run at 3 copies, so multiple Curses and Souls can cover for each other, or you just say, nope, I'm not running it at all, 0 copies, because 1 or 2 copies is rather ineffective. For me, I'm not willing to devote the deck space required to run 3 copies of each, so 0 copies it is. Embodiment of Apophis is the original trap monster, and unfortunately, while it is the original innovator of the mechanic, not surprisingly, it is probably the worst of the bunch, for time has not worn on it well. Overall, though, the biggest problem with Apophis is the main phase summon restriction. If it did not have that restriction, it would still be on the outs, but it would not be nearly as bad. One of the possibilities for this deck is resetting other trap monsters to combo off the destruction effect of pattern over and over again, so you have consistent interruption destruction during your opponent's turn. Cyber Shadow Gardna is one of the options for achieving this idea, for it can naturally reset itself during the opponent's end phase. Gardna also has a nice ability to match the attack of a monster that attacks it, thus creating an environment where both monsters go down, or if something like Imperial Custom is on the field, opponent's monster goes down. Unfortunately, Gardna is an incredibly inefficient card, for it cannot actually attack, because it can only be summoned during the opponent's main phase, and resets itself to the back row during the opponent's end phase. Thus, its only real contribution is its combination with Imperial Custom to act as a form of attack blocker, but that job is done better by Stungray, and most of the time by Metal Reflect Slime's 3000 beefy defensive body. Or it can combination with Pattern, but that job is done better in my opinion by other cards. While this card looks like it's quality, I find it's too inconsistent to actually be really helpful in the deck. Shapesister is one of the somewhat forgotten trap monsters, and for good reason. It's rather bad. The major problems with Sister are that it has no attack or defense power, and you can only activate 1 per turn. The only possible benefit of Sister is its tuner standing, but there are just better tuners that you can run in the deck that are actual monsters. If this card returned itself to the back row from the graveyard when it was used in a Synchro summons with, let's say, like another trap monster, then it could have been unique enough to potentially carve out some sort of like niche playstyle for itself, but that's certainly not the case. Well, that takes care of all of the relevant trap monsters that are run, or could be run. There are some others, but they are more specific to different types of archetype decks, not trap monsters themselves. However, the deck looks rather bare. What's next? Understanding that trap monsters remain as continuous traps, the next obvious step is to examine what cards work well with continuous traps. there are 3 immediate options. The most important complementary card is Imperial Custom, which protects other continuous traps from destruction, forcing the opponent to destroy it before any other continuous trap, including your trap monsters, especially Pattern. Imperial Custom frequently produces a negative for the opponent as well by chaining it to the potential destruction of another continuous trap. Some might think 3 copies are too much, but in my opinion, Custom is just too important to this deck to run at anything less, even though I only run 12 trap monsters, because of the level of speed and power in the current meta. Magic Planner is definitely high quality in this deck, not only providing speed, but also clearing dead cards from the field. However, one must be careful in its use, avoiding a full back row because it is a spell and thereby would become worthless. Planner is especially useful for clearing out multiple customs. However, because this deck does have important continuous traps that want to stay on the field, cough, pattern, cough, I feel running 2 is more appropriate than running 3, as 3 can lead to some dead draws and tough choices. The final initial immediate consideration that seems attractive for this deck is the prospective boss monster, Uriah, Lord of Searing Flame. However, the problem with this card is, in this deck, it's basically an all my eggs in one basket card, because the resources that have to be given up to put it on the field are rather extensive. In a lot of respects, Uriah is a quintessential win more card, for there is very little this deck can do with Uriah that it cannot do without Uriah. Another option that was generally popular for this deck in the past, and still may be popular, is the very old card Fake Trap. On its face, Fake Trap seems rather nice, because it sacrifices itself to protect any other trap card that would be destroyed by a card effect. However, the problem with this card is that that's all it does, which basically makes it kind of a poor substitute for Imperial Custom. The concern with additional protection, in a lot of respects for this deck, is that it sacrifices explosiveness and consistency for this protection, and Fake Trap cannot really aid in advancing the offensive strategy to a point that other cards can. Overall, 3 copies of Imperial Custom should be more than enough protection for this deck. Fake Trap is basically redundant in my mind. The final card for consideration in this context of cards that heavily influence traps in this deck is a rather new card, Booby Trap E. Booby Trap is actually rather nice in this deck, because it runs a variety of important continuous trap cards in Custom and various trap monsters, and the discard cost is not a big deal because this deck will consistently have cards in the hand. However, Booby Trap is only a support card, and running too many can definitely clog, hurting the deck. I run 1 copy. Now, moving on to the general monsters that make up the deck. Obviously, draw power is almost always important, and with this deck's ability to summon during the opponent's turn, Cardcar D is definitely a quality option, 3 copies. Keeping with the general capacity to summon during the opponent's turn, I like running the 1 allowable copy of Neo-Spacian Grand Mole, which complements this deck very well because it can remove the high-value targets that can evade Pattern's effect. Grand Mole is very effective in this deck. While normally a somewhat niche card, mostly reserved for casual decks, the Calculator is another monster that finds a nice home in this deck, for this deck has the ability to easily and consistently put at least 9 levels of monsters on the field, making the Calculator a 2700 normal summoned attack monster. The Calculator is typically the big hitter of this deck. It's not difficult to get up to 6000 plus. Recall that I dismissed Shapesister as needless for this deck because of better tuner options. The 2 most obvious quality tuner options for this deck are Glow Up Bulb and Plaguespreader, largely because of their graveyard summoning effects. I like Plaguespreader more than I like Glow Up in this build due to its ability to more easily slide from a Zoma to a Stardust Charge Warrior and then a Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, or a Stungray into a Pixie Dragon and then to a Hot Red Archfiend Abyss, versus Glow Up's ability to make Trishula. The final monster for the deck plays to the strategy of resetting trap monsters to help continue to fuel the activation of Pattern's destruction effect to heavily handicap the opponent's playmaking capacity. This monster is an old spirit and somewhat general staple for this deck, Tsukuyomi. Yomi serves a dual purpose, resetting your traps and flipping opponents' monsters face down to make them easier to remove. With the normal summons frequently available in this deck, Yomi is consistently live. 1 copy. While I don't run him, Thunder King Ryo can definitely be a useful choice for this deck to handicap the speed of an opponent's deck, making a number of their cards quasi-dead, and dealing with some important summon. Thunder King gets more mileage out of this deck than most because the deck frequently forces the opponent into a grind, giving King more of an opportunity to hit the field. Unfortunately, I just don't seem to find the necessary deck space to run him. For the remainder of the spells, I run Raigeki, but not surprisingly, no Soul Charge. For draw power, I run 1 copy of Upstart Goblin, 3 copies of Pot of Duality. Outside of the rare XZ or Synchro summon, special summoning is somewhat limited during your turn, and 1 copy of Card of Demise. While one might think that running more Card of Demises is appropriate for this type of deck, it really isn't, because recall that trap monsters take up back row, which significantly limits its immediate usefulness. In this deck, Card of Demise acts more as a rebuilding card. Finally, closing out the spells, I run 3 copies of Necrovalley, for 2 major reasons. First, this deck basically has almost no banishing from the graveyard, or accessory summoning from the graveyard, as Plaguespreader does his own special summoning. Second, this deck has 2 horrible matchups that it will commonly see in the meta. ABC, well, at least that's coming very soon, and Cosmos. While Necrovalley is certainly not a cure-all against these decks, it significantly increases the probability of victory, and Necrovalley overall is a quality card that helps against other decks as well, thus it's not a liability to main deck. Finally, finishing up the traps, I run 2 copies of Drowning Mirror Force for those times when the field is broken, 1 copy of Torrential Tribute for play interruption, and its improved effectiveness thanks to Imperial Custom protection and Necrovalley, and 1 copy of Solemn Warning. The extra deck can jump between a variety of unique XZs if one chooses to run Mirrored and Cat, or use Synchros and XZs like this one. For my extra deck, I run 1 Blackwing Onimaru the Divine Thunder. It cannot be destroyed by card effects, and it can work with Plaguespreader to convert a 3000 defense Metal Reflect Slime into a 3000 attacker. I run the 1 aforementioned Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, 1 XX-Saber Gottoms. This is for when Pattern needs to become an attacker, so the 2500 defense Pattern becomes a 3100 attack monster. 1 Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, 1 Ancient Pixie Dragon, 3000 defense, pop a monster when Necrovalley is on the field, and it's a bridge to Abyss. 1 Stardust Charge Warrior, 1 number 81 Superdreadnought Rail Cannon Super Dora, 1 Superdreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav, 1 Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon, 1 Constellar Pleiades, 1 number 61 Volcasaurus, 1 number S39 Utopia the Lightning, and 1 number 39 Utopia, 1 Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer, and 1 Abyss Dweller. In the end, trap decks have a chance to be somewhat successful in the current meta because they have the ability to create a natural grind state, which places a number of opposition decks at a disadvantage, especially those decks running Pot of Desires, which limits their long-term options. The ability of trap monster decks to interrupt plays during the opponent's turn in a natural fashion also provides a significant advantage. The one major problem for the deck is coming in the form of ABCs, for that banishing ability can really hurt, as Imperial Customs is basically worthless. In fact, citing out Imperial Customs actually makes sense in the ABC matchup. Overall, playing a trap monster deck can be fun, but one must be patient and tactical in the plays, for one wrong move and bam, your back row is full and your play potential is significantly reduced. Well, that is my trap monster deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.